I want to start with something boring, because that's the truth of it. Most of what I'm going to tell you happened in a building that smelled like carpet shampoo and burnt coffee, under fluorescent lights that hummed a little flat, and the scariest part is how ordinary all of it was right up until it wasn't. I've read the kind of stories people tell about places like this. They always start at the worst moment. Mine doesn't. Mine starts with a job I took because I needed the money and the hours fit around my daughter's schedule. I was a polysomnographic technician, a sleep tech. If you've never done an overnight study, the short version is this. You come into the clinic in the evening, you meet the patients who are booked to sleep there, and you wire them up. Electrodes on the scalp, on the face, on the legs, a band around the chest and one around the belly to measure breathing, a little clip on the finger for oxygen, a wire under the nose to feel the air move. Then you send them to bed in a room that's meant to look like a hotel room and doesn't quite manage it, and you go sit in a dim control room and watch their brain waves crawl across 6 or 7 screens until morning. You mark when they fall asleep. You mark when they stop breathing, which for a lot of them is constantly. You write it all down. In the morning, you peel the glue out of their hair, you hand them a slip of paper, and you go home when the day staff comes in. The place was called Fairview Sleep Medicine. It sat on the second floor of a medical office park off the highway above a physical therapy practice and a lab that did blood draws. Nothing about it was remarkable. 6 bedrooms down a short hall, a control room, a small kitchen with a coffee maker that somebody had labeled "Do Not Move" for reasons no one remembered, and a records room in the back that was really just a closet with filing cabinets and a couple of servers that ran hot. We had a scheduling coordinator named Deb who worked days, a handful of doctors who read the studies remotely and I rarely saw, and 3 or 4 of us techs who rotated the nights. I worked with a guy named Marcus most of the time. He'd been there 9 years. He was the one who trained me, and he had that particular calm that people get when they've done the same quiet job for a long time in a building where nothing ever happens. He drank tea, not coffee. He brought his own from home in a thermos. He'd worked in a hospital before and said he took the clinic job because it was slow, and he said the word slow like it was something precious, like he'd earned it. I tell you all this so you understand the texture of the place. It was routine. It was paperwork and patient names and the same 6 rooms every night. When you spend enough time somewhere like that, you stop seeing it. Your eyes glaze over the schedule. You know before you read it who's coming in, because it's mostly the same people cycling back for follow-ups, the same tired truck drivers and the same anxious middle-aged men whose wives sent them in, because the snoring had gotten frightening. The first thing I need to tell you happened about 4 months in, on a Tuesday night in February, and I almost didn't notice it at all. It was a slow night, only 3 rooms booked. I'd wired up my patients, gotten them settled, and I was sitting in the control room around 1 a.m. doing what you do on slow nights, which is drink coffee and watch the little green limes and try to stay awake yourself, because there's a particular irony in a job where you fight sleep all night in a building designed for it. The system we used was called Somnicore. It was old software, clunky, the kind of thing that had been updated just enough times to be held together with tape. It kept the schedule, the patient records, the study data, the discharge summaries, all of it. Around 1, a notification came up in the corner of the screen. A discharge had been finalized. That in itself wasn't strange. Sometimes a study ends early, sometimes a patient can't sleep and gives up and the doctor signs off on a partial. But we had 3 patients that night, all of them still asleep, all of them still on my monitors. Nobody had been discharged. Nobody had gone home. I clicked it. It opened a discharge summary for a patient in room 4. Room 4 was empty that night. I could see it on the camera feed. Dark. Made bed. The little side table. Nobody in it. But the summary said a patient named Elliot Reyes had completed an overnight study in room 4 and been discharged at 1:04 a.m. It had a chart number. It had a date of birth. It said the study was unremarkable and recommended follow-up in 3 months. I sat there and I did what anyone would do. I assumed I'd made a mistake. I thought maybe I'd misremembered the schedule, that maybe there had been a fourth patient I'd forgotten to wire up, which would have been a real problem, a patient sitting in a dark room all night waiting for me. So I got up and I walked down the hall and I opened the door to room 4, and it was empty. The bed was made with the corners tucked the way the day cleaner did them. The chair was pushed in. There was no bag, no shoes, no glass of water on the side table. Nobody had been in that room. I went back and I pulled up the schedule. 3 patients. No Elliot Rays. I searched the name in Somnicore and there he was. A chart, a discharge, a completed study. But no admission. No intake form. No consent signature. No record that anyone had ever checked him in. In our system, before a patient can be discharged, they have to be admitted. That's how the workflow goes. Admission first, then the study, then discharge. You can't finalize a discharge for a patient who was never admitted. The software isn't supposed to let you. But there it was. I want to be honest about my reaction because I think it matters. I wasn't scared. I was annoyed. I assumed it was a glitch, some ghost of a data entry error, maybe a test record somebody had left in the system years ago that surfaced at a weird time. I wrote a note about it in the shift log, Phantom Discharge RM4, no matching admit, flagged for Deb, and I went back to watching my 3 real patients breathe and stop breathing and breathe again. In the morning I mentioned it to Marcus when he came in to cover the tail end. He looked at the record for a while, longer than I expected. Then he said, "Rays." Just the name, like he was tasting it. I asked if it meant anything to him. He said no. He said sometimes the old records did weird things, that the system had eaten a database once years back and things had come out scrambled after. He said he'd seen worse. He told me not to worry about it, and I didn't. Deb deleted the record a few days later, or said she did. She emailed me back about my flag and said it was a duplicate artifact, whatever that meant, and that she'd cleaned it up. And that would have been the end of it. It should have been the end of it. It was one strange record on one slow night, and I've since learned that if the strange thing only happens once, you're lucky, and you should thank whatever you thank and never think about it again. It happened again in April. Different room this time. Room 2. Same pattern. A discharge finalized in the middle of the night for a patient who wasn't there, with no admission on file. And the name was the same. Elliot Rays. Same chart number. Same date of birth. Discharged at 1:04 a.m., which I noticed, because it was the exact time as before, down to the minute, and that's the kind of coincidence that snags on something in the back of your mind, even when you're telling yourself it's nothing. I didn't write it in the log that time. I don't fully know why. I think part of me didn't want Deb to think I was the tech who kept flagging phantom records, the one who couldn't tell a glitch from a ghost. So I just deleted it myself and went home. But it stayed with me on the drive back. That time, Einsteinfia. The same name. I remember sitting in my car in the parking lot of my apartment with the engine off, watching the sky go gray, thinking about how the summary had said the study was unremarkable. Unremarkable. As if someone had slept there. As if there were data. That's what I checked the next night I was in. I pulled the deleted record from the recycle folder. Somnicore kept deleted items for 30 days. And I looked at the actual study attached to it, and there was one. A full night of it. 8 hours of EEG, EKG, respiratory data, oxygen saturation, leg movements. A complete polysomnogram. Hypnograms showing the sleep stages cycling the way they're supposed to. Light sleep into deep sleep into REM and back, 4 or 5 times across the night. Textbook. Somebody had slept a full and unremarkable night in a room that was empty, and the machines had recorded all of it. I want to stop here and tell you all the ways I tried to explain this, because I tried very hard, and I think the trying is the part people don't understand when they haven't been through something like this. You don't just accept it. Your mind fights it. Your mind is very good at fighting it, I thought. The data is fake. Some kind of demo data set that ships with the software, a sample study they use for training, and it's getting attached to these phantom records. That was my best theory, and I held on to it for weeks. But sample data is clean. It's idealized. This data wasn't. It had artifacts in it. A loose electrode around 3 a.m. that made the signal jump, a stretch where the patient must have rolled onto the sensor and the breathing band read strange, a cough. Real nights are messy. This one was messy. It was somebody's actual sleep, I thought. Someone's doing this on purpose. A tech on another shift, playing a prank, or worse, using our rooms and our equipment off the books, running studies on people who weren't supposed to be in the system, and somehow the admissions weren't getting logged. That one scared me in a normal human way, and I actually looked into it. I checked the badge access logs for the nights the phantom discharges appeared. Nobody had badged in except me. The doors to the clinic logged every entry. On those nights, I was the only person who'd come through them, which left me with a worse thought, and I'll just say it plainly. I started to wonder if I was doing it. If I was, somehow, admitting and wiring and studying a patient during those nights and not remembering. I know how that sounds, but I worked alone, at night, fighting my own exhaustion, in a building full of beds. People do strange things when they're that tired. I'd heard of techs falling asleep in the recliner in the control room and waking with no memory of the last hour. What if I was getting up, in some half-asleep state, and going through the whole intake ritual with nobody, and my hands knew the procedure so well they could do it while I was gone from myself, so I started checking the cameras. We had feeds in every room and in the hall, recorded to a drive that overwrote itself every 2 weeks. The next time a phantom discharge came up, May, room 5, Elliot Rays, 1:04 a.m. I pulled the footage for that night immediately, before it could overwrite. I watched the whole thing at high speed. 8 hours of room 5. And here is the thing I have never been able to explain, the thing that changed how I understood the building I was working in. The room was empty, the whole night. Nobody came in. The bed stayed made. But the covers on the bed, I watched them the whole way through, and I swear to you on my daughter, at some point in the early hours, without anyone touching them, they settled, the way covers settle when someone has been lying under them and gets up. That slow slump of fabric relaxing into the shape of an absence. I watched it 3, 4 times. There was no one there, and then the shape of someone leaving. I didn't sleep well after that. I mean that literally. And it's a particular kind of cruel, being a sleep tech who can't sleep. I'd lie in bed in the morning after a shift, blackout curtains drawn, and I'd think about the covers settling, and I'd think about the number 1.04, and I couldn't turn my brain off. I started drinking more coffee, which made it worse. My wife! We were separated by then, sharing custody. She said I looked gray. My daughter asked why my hands were shaky. I told her it was the coffee, which was true, mostly. I brought it to Marcus again, finally, because I couldn't carry it alone anymore. I told him everything. The repetition, the same name, the same time, the data, the covers. I expected him to tell me I was cracking up. I almost wanted him to, because that would have been a problem with a solution. I could rest. I could see a doctor. I could fix myself. But he didn't say that. He listened to all of it with that flat calm of his, and when I was done, he was quiet for a long time, and then he asked me one question. He asked me what the date of birth was on the record, I told him. And something moved across his face, just slightly, and settled the way those covers had settled. He said, "That's the day the clinic opened. I didn't understand," he explained. Fairview Sleep Medicine had opened its doors in a particular month of a particular year, and the date of birth on Elliot Rays' phantom chart was that exact day. The patient's birthday was the building's birthday. Marcus knew it because he'd been there nearly since the start, because there'd been a little plaque by the front desk once with the founding date on it, before a remodel took it down. He told me something else then, and this is the part I've gone back and forth on telling, because it's the part that makes people think the whole thing is a story I built backward from an ending. But I'm telling it the way he told it. He said that when he first started at the clinic, 9 years before, an old tech who was training him, a woman who'd since retired and, he thought, passed away, had shown him something in the system. A patient with no admission, a discharge that appeared on slow nights. She told him it had been happening since before her time too, that every few years the details shifted. The name, the room, but the shape of it stayed the same. She told him the clinic had rules that weren't written anywhere, and the main one was this: you log the discharge and you let it go, and you do not go looking for the admission, because there wasn't one. There had never been one. Looking for it was the mistake. I asked him why he'd never told me. He said because I'd never asked, and because for most techs it never came up. The phantom only surfaced on the slowest nights, and most people either never saw it or saw it once and forgot. He said he'd hoped I'd be one of those. He said the ones who see it more than once are the ones who start looking, and the ones who look are the ones it starts to notice. I want to be careful here, because I don't want you to think Marcus was some spooky oracle handing me forbidden knowledge. He wasn't like that. He was a tired man in his 50s who drank tea from a thermos and had made peace with something he didn't understand by deciding not to poke it. He said all of this apologetically, almost embarrassed, like he was confessing to a superstition. At the end, he just said, "I stopped looking a long time ago. I'd stop if I were you." And then he packed up his thermos and went home, and I never saw him look me in the eye quite the same way again. I tried to stop. I really did. For a few weeks, I did the thing he described. When the discharge came up, I logged it and closed it and didn't open the study, didn't check the cameras, didn't search the name. And the nights were quiet. It came up twice more that summer, and both times I let it go, and both times I got a full, ordinary shift and went home to my ordinary life, and I started to think maybe Marcus was right, maybe the trick was just to look away. But you already know I didn't manage it. If I had, I wouldn't be telling you any of this. There'd be nothing to tell. What broke my resolve was small, the way it always is. It was September, and I was cleaning up a real patient's chart at the end of a real study, and I fat-fingered the search and pulled up the phantom record by accident. Elliot rays. And I noticed something I'd never looked at closely before, because I'd always been so focused on the missing admission, the impossible data, the time. I noticed the discharging clinician, the name of the person who'd signed off on the discharge. Every discharge in Somnicore is signed. It stamps the credentials of whoever finalized it. The discharging clinician on Elliot Reyes' record was me. My name, my employee ID, my credentials. On a discharge finalized at 1:04 in the morning for a patient I'd never admitted, in a room I'd watched stay empty. My name was on all of them. I checked the old ones. The ones from February and April and May, the ones I'd pulled back from the recycle folder. Mine. Every single one. Even the ones I could prove I hadn't touched. The ones from nights I could show I was busy with real patients. My name, my ID, 1:04 a.m. And that's when I did the thing Marcus told me not to do. I went looking for the admission. Not Reyes' admission. Mine. Because here's what I couldn't stop thinking. If the discharge had my name on it, and the discharge was real in the system, even though the patient wasn't, then what did that make me? The software wouldn't let you finalize a discharge without an admission. It had let this one through. Unless, somewhere, there was an admission it was matching to. Not Reyes'. Mine. Some record of me entering this system that I'd never seen. I searched my own name in Somnicore the way you'd search a patient. And I found a chart. I found a chart for myself that I had never created. Going back further than I had worked there, it listed me as a patient. It said I'd completed an overnight sleep study at Fairview. The date on it was before I was hired. Before I'd ever set foot in the building, according to everything I remembered, I had apparently slept a full, unremarkable night in one of those 6 rooms and been discharged in the morning with a recommendation to follow up in 3 months. I don't remember it. I want to be as clear about that as I can be, because I've turned it over 10,000 times. I have no memory of ever being a patient there. I remember applying for the job. I remember the interview in the little office with the practice manager who's since left. I remember my first night of training with Marcus. But the system says that before all of that, I came in through those doors as a tired man who couldn't sleep, and I was wired up, and I slept, and my brain waves crawled across the screens, and someone sat in the dim control room and watched me, and marked when I fell asleep, and marked when I stopped breathing, and wrote it all down. And then I was discharged. And then, apparently, I applied to work there. I pulled the study attached to my chart. My own night, and it was messy the way real nights are messy. A loose electrode, a cough, a stretch where I must have rolled onto the sensor. It was a real night of a real person's sleep. And I sat in that control room at 4 a.m. and I watched the hypnogram of a night I have no memory of living, and I understood, finally, what Marcus had been so gently trying to keep me from understanding. There isn't a monster in this story. I know that's not what people want. I've thought about whether there was ever anything in room 4 or room 2 or room 5, some presence that slept in those beds and settled the covers, and I don't think there was. Or not exactly. I think the building was doing something simpler and worse than haunting. I think it kept records. I think it had been keeping them for a long time, longer than any of us worked there, and that the records were the realer thing, more real than the people. The date of birth was the day the clinic opened because the clinic was, in some way I can't explain, the patient. It had been sleeping there since it opened. It filed a discharge for itself on the quietest nights, and it needed a clinician's name on the discharge. And it took the name of whoever was alone in the building and looking too closely. And to have your name on a discharge, in that system, you first had to have been admitted. So it admitted you. Quietly, retroactively, before you ever arrived. It made you a patient so that it could make you staff, so that your name could sign the thing that let it sleep. I quit 2 days after I found my chart. I didn't make a scene. I told Deb I had childcare issues, which was believable, and I worked out my last 2 weeks, and on my final night I did not look at anything I wasn't supposed to. I logged my real patients. I let the building do whatever it did, and in the morning I peeled the glue out of a truck driver's hair and handed him his slip of paper, and I walked out through the doors that logged every entry. And I drove home, and I told myself it was over. That I'd escaped it. That whatever it was back there in that office park above the physical therapy practice, and I was out here in my own life, with my daughter and my gray face and my bad sleep, and it couldn't follow me. That was 3 years ago. I've had normal jobs since. I don't work nights anymore. My sleep even came back, mostly. Here's why I'm telling you this now. Tonight, instead of leaving it buried. 2 weeks ago, I got a letter in the mail. A real letter. On real paper. Forwarded from an old address. It was from Fairview Sleep Medicine. The clinic's still there, I checked. It was a routine follow-up notice, the kind they send patients who are overdue. It said their records showed I'd completed a sleep study and had never returned for my recommended 3-month follow-up. It said it had now been some time and that for continuity of care they'd gone ahead and scheduled me. It gave a date. It gave a room. Room 4. And at the bottom, where these letters list the referring or treating clinician, so you know who to ask for. At the bottom, it had a name I didn't recognize. Some new tech, I assume, hired since I left. A name I'd never heard. And under the name, the date the clinic opened. As a date of birth, I haven't gone. I'm not going to go. But I keep thinking about that new tech, whoever they are, sitting alone in the control room on a slow night, watching the little green lines. I keep thinking about how it's probably slow right now, how it's probably around 1 a.m. there, and I keep thinking about the thing Marcus never quite said, the thing I only understood after I'd already looked, that the discharge always has a name on it, and it was my name for a while, and now it isn't, and a name like that doesn't just disappear from a system. It gets reassigned. It gets matched to a new admission. It waits for someone else to be alone in the building and look too closely, so it can let them go. I was discharged. That's the part I can't put down. Somewhere in that system 3 years ago, there's a record that says I completed my stay and was released and recommended for follow-up. But I never remember being admitted. And if you've been listening this whole time, if you've stayed up late with my voice in your ears the way I used to stay up watching those screens, then I need you to understand why I finally had to say all this out loud, to someone, to anyone, It's not that I think the building will come for me, it's that I've started to wonder whether it ever discharged the right person. Whether I walked out of those doors 3 years ago, or whether something did, wearing my name, and I'm the record it left behind. And I can't check. That's the thing. There's no admission to look for. There never was. I've searched my own life the way I searched that chart, for the intake, for the consent, for the moment I signed my name and agreed to all of this, and I can't find it anywhere. I only have the discharge, and the recommendation to follow up in 3 months.